Here's Parks Associates' SmartTechCheck podcast with Mark Vina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, leader of Parks Associates' Smart Home Research Practice. And welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all consumer tech topics that are smart home, home automation, security, console gaming, entertainment, and much, much more. Today is Tuesday, August 24th, 2021. Big week in tech, so we're going to chat about a lot of different things today. On the roster for today's podcast are my usual partners in crime. That's Rob Pegoraro, who writes for USA Today, Fast Company, and Wirecutter. Stewart Wolpin, who writes for Twice and Techlicious. I just love that name. John Quain, our resident usual journalist who writes on technology for the New York Times and Tom's Guide, and I can't believe this, he's out test driving cars in Napa Valley, and I kid you not, I'm not making it up, but that's his excuse. So we'll have to go with that. So I've asked Liam Gaughan, the Park Associates research analyst who covers the entertainment category for the firm, to join us. Gentlemen, good afternoon from Addison, Texas, where it's a scorching 96 degrees. But as my mom likes to say, it's a dry heat. How are all of you?
Cool.
What's the temperature in New York, by the way? Were you guys down in Washington? I guess you were in Washington.
Yes, we are both in Washington. Yes.
Is the weather still? Is it, you're still in that oppressive, humid?
It's the August weather I've grown to know and love over the past 3+ decades around our nation's capital.
That's why legislators leave in August.
You know what the interesting thing is? Now that I've been in Dallas for some time, and I've been here for the last couple of weeks. It's very hot today, but it doesn't. It feels hot, but there's not much humidity. It's not like Houston, where I used to live years ago when I worked for Compaq, which was like going to Singapore. I commiserate with both of you gentlemen who live in Washington. So I'm sorry about that, but got a lot of great topics to talk about. Let's tee up the first one. And that is the Park Associates Factoid of the Week. I'm going to turn this over to Liam, who's our entertainment aficionado, to talk about this because there's some really interesting information that we just emailed the world. I believe we sent this out yesterday. But Liam, let you comment on this, and then I'd like to get Rob and Stuart to chime in.
I think this is, definitely the direction that we expected over-the-top video services to head. They've really just amped up their libraries, and now we're pretty much seeing that primarily online video content is taking the place of the theatrical viewing experience. There's certainly been some big box office hits over the summer, but a lot of them are simultaneously available on streaming services. Black Widow is the number one movie at the domestic box office, and you can also get that on Disney Plus. So I think a lot of the habits that consumers developed during the pandemic are really it really emphasized the trends that were already occurring within just a preference for video services. And we've already seen so many services launch. We're seeing, the return of a lot of these upcoming titles that tend to spike viewership. And so I see the market getting even more crowded moving forward, especially with all the niche services launching as well. I do think it's interesting that we're seeing such a preference on mobile viewing, and it seems like a lot of the services are really developing strategies in order to corner that mobile market. We actually just saw Netflix is launching into gaming pretty soon, and they're going to start as a mobile only, doing mobile only gaming. And so it'll be really interesting to see which devices and which device preferences develop as the services subscription stack.
Let's flash that graph up again, if you don't mind. What's interesting to me, because of the four of us on the podcast today, 3 of us are in the mature and boomers category, and Stuart's in the, I'm not going to disclose his age, but he's in that mature category, right? Am I right, Stuart?
Senior citizen, thank you very much.
No, I'm joshing, but there's not a lot of delta between boomers and mature. And if you kind of go to the other side of the extreme, where the ZenG category, to me, it's remarkable how television, a platform that I'll say the 3 or 4 of us grew up with, since the day we were born, how that's become, decidedly unpopular with younger folks. And this kind of wraps some numbers around that. So let me turn this over to Stewart, our resident mature person. No, I'm not. That's not fair. You're not in the mature category, right? I'm
a silverback.
So, Stewart, what's your reaction to this data?
Well, it's not surprising, and the thing that strikes me, again from a historical note, because I'm old, this is not the first challenge that film has had. If you go back to the early 1950s, the cinema world had to react to people wanting to stay home and watch the television. Right. And they reacted to that by putting on big widescreen epics. And it's very eerily similar to
CinemaScope.
What's that?
CinemaScope. Remember CinemaScope?
CinemaScope, exactly right, as well as Cinerama. And all of those early Cinerama widescreen motion pictures were of the sword and sandal variety. The Robe and Hercules and things like, and it wasn't until Ben-Hur that you actually had an intelligent sword and sandal movie. And there's a very similar thing happening today in that the films that are at the top of the box office aren't exactly those deep dramas that you remember from motion pictures. All of a sudden, those are being played out on episodic streaming series as opposed to 2 or 2.5 hour films. And those 2 to 2.5 hour films that are serious subjects, for the most part, are playing in the art houses and then going straight to streaming. So I think what's happening is the same thing to a similar extent what happened in the 50s, that the Hollywood reaction to streaming or television in the 50s is that they're putting on the most lowest denominator fare to get people to go to the movies and reserving their serious content for other venues where they think a wider variety of people might have access to them without having to go to the theater. Now, whether or not Hollywood is going to be able to come up with something other than Jungle Cruise and things of this nature to draw, people back into the theaters other than kids, that remains to be seen.
Right. Now, Rob, I know you've told me in the past that you're really a Gen Z type of person, right? You're only about 19 years old.
I am the token Gen Xer. It's nice to see that my generation has not been erased off this chart between the boomers and the millennials like usual. That doesn't really surprise me. I guess I personally, and I guess here I'm showing my age, I don't quite I spend enough time looking at this thing. I don't want to watch any sort of long or even medium form video on it. Certainly not the sort of stuff that I would be paying for on an OTT service. Tablet, sure, that makes more sense. Smartphone, no, I'm not so sold on that.
Well, what I would suggest, by the way, is that because I think you're right. I mean, for content like a movie, which is a couple hours, although movies are getting shorter, but long forms of video entertainment. Obviously, bigger, more real estate is a much more fulfilling experience. However, if you're watching live sports, or if you do what I did last night, I went to a restaurant to eat, and I could not be away from the Yankee game for 10 minutes. So I, summoned up my MLB.com app. And by the way, guys, they won last night again. The Yankees won 10 in a row. Okay, I'm excited against a very good Atlanta team, by the way. Away.
The Mets did not win their 10th game in a row last night.
Yeah, well, hey, hope springs eternal, Rob. But we're going to get into this, another very interesting topic, because I think it goes to what Stewart was saying, is that it's interesting how, actually, it's the next topic after this. It goes to how is Hollywood reacting to these usage model changes with people. We're going to get into this in a second, but got to talk about this because, it's late August and the rumors are already out about iPhone 13, discussion about screens. Is there going to be fingerprint under glass, which is a hard thing to do? Are they going to get rid of the cutout? Is it going to be a bigger battery? Is it going to be a smaller battery? So I guess the question really is, and by the way, the rumors are even centering around announcement date. And what's always interesting to me about this is that the supply chain implications for iPhones are so humongous. It's hard to keep any of this under wraps. It's just impossible. And they've really socialized the audience, their customer base in the last 12 or 13 years since the iPhone was announced, that they have these kind of cyclical announcements with a new form factor in the September timeframe. But let me start with Stewart. Stewart, do you even think this is relevant, or do you read a lot of this rumor stuff, or do you just wait for the big announcement and then you get serious about what they're doing?
No, I've been looking at them for the last couple of months already, because as soon as the new one comes out, they start talking about what the next one's going to be. But I mean, they're talking about a smaller notch and a bigger battery, obviously, and all of these sorts of things, an AMOLED 120 hertz screen, and a couple of other gizmos and gizmos. The thing that strikes me about all of this that nobody has discussed, and I have no inside information on this. This is simply my speculation, but the nomenclature 13. Obviously, a lot of building engineers do not build 13th floors. And I'm really curious whether or not Apple is just going to skip 13.
Go to 14.
Or even the 15, since they're up to iOS 15 also. Why not match the iOS number with the phone number, just to keep those straight? Or keep it 14, since the popular proposed announcement date is September 14th. But I'm very curious about whether or not Apple will actually keep the 13 number as part of the nomenclature. Has nothing to do with anything, just making my head explode.
Interesting. And the only thing I will say is that if you recall, I know both of you do know this, Microsoft has had challenges with even number with even number releases. Windows 7 was a big hit. Windows 8 was pretty much a disaster. I forget what number Vista was, but Vista obviously was not a huge hit. But they try to ignore even numbers if they can.
It's like Star Trek movies.
But
even number Star Trek movies were good.
And odd ones were terrible.
Questionable. Wrath of Khan is still a great movie. But the thing is that the OLED thing will be a big deal. I mean, I think that will be. I don't think a lot of people know that when you have an OLED display, it really does, from a graphics resolution and from a clarity standpoint, it is a markedly better experience than a non-OLED display. So I do think that's
especially in the sunlight.
Yes. So Liam, let me flip this over to you. Are you the kind of guy that gets online at 7 o'clock not 7 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning and get online for a new iPhone, or are you not really that kind of person?
I'm definitely an iPhone person. I don't catch the live stream every time, although it's always an interesting display of showmanship. That's something that obviously Jobs was so well known for, was having these elaborate presentations. So I look forward to that aspect of it. I managed to get a new phone recently, so I don't know if I'll sign up for the new version. That's very interesting about it being the 13. That is very eerie.
I have a feeling the number will not impact sales. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think that's going to hold a lot of people.
I don't know.
We'll see. We'll write this down. We've got Stewart on videotape right now. Rob, what are your thoughts? Are you out there online? Are you going to be on there online getting a new iPhone 13? Or
no? I mean, I've basically written off the iPhone ever since they got rid of the headphone jack, and this thing still takes its own proprietary connector. So what I was hoping to see in the iPhone 13 was to get rid of the lightning cable, which adds no value at all. And just the other day, my kid was like looking for a cable to recharge her iPad, and I had to say, no, you can't use this one. You got to use that one. Mm-hmm. Direct your complaints to Tim Cook. That would be one pain point they could address. And I guess they're not. The other one, this whole issue of sticking with Face ID. I don't know why Apple's doing that. It doesn't look like we're going to go back to never wearing masks in public. And with Face ID, they have an unlock solution that doesn't work with the mask on. Apple's solution is to buy an Apple Watch. That's an awful solution. That's insultingly bad. And you could just put the Touch ID button in the power button. They know how to do it on that last iPad Pro. So sticking to a past product decision because reversing it would look bad, or that, you want to sell the feature, not the problem it solves, that's questionable decision making. I'm not so sold on that. As far as the number, I would say lean into it. Have the event on Monday, September 13th. Just go all out for it. Lucky 13.
And challenge the gods of bad luck that Apple can overcome.
Right. Yep.
13. That's an interesting thing.
Have a black cat walk in front of Tim Cook.
In a black turtleneck.
Yes.
I will send Tim an email with that advice after the podcast. Let's go to the next topic. Now, Stewart, this is actually a topic that I think is absolutely a terrific topic to talk about, because very, very few people talk about how the streaming services has really impacted the creative process. And what I mean by that is that let's just take a book, for example, where books are typically very difficult, especially if it's a lengthy book, to do a full-blown motion picture, because motion pictures are generally 2 hours. You have to be very selective in terms of content you bring out of a book. From a character development standpoint, sometimes you have to combine characters, and many, many stories about, screenwriters, especially if they were not the author of the book, had to make certain concessions. And you could say the same thing about TV series, episodic TV series, which, that's the traditional model where content would come out every week. But streaming television and streaming series really changed the dynamic around that, because all of a sudden, if you tell a screenwriter or a writer, hey, you just don't have 2 hours, you have, I'm going to make a number up, 70 hours that you're going to blow out the entire season of a program in one full strike. That the advantage to that is that if I'm a viewer watching that content, you can really have lots and lots of character complexity. You can change the process dramatically, the way you write and conjure up different events. And you could go into levels of detail that you could never have gone into in the old format, even series format where you have an episode every week. So let's talk a little bit about that, because, to your point, Hulu and others, and especially Apple hasn't followed that model.
Well, this has been a problem for every new media type that has come out since the age of media. When radio and the problem is, generally speaking, is that the new media tends to copy the old media until the new media companies realize they have something completely different. So, for instance, radio started out with people reading newspapers. Television started out as having radio shows filmed. The internet started out with taking print publications and simply slapping them online. And you have this throughout the history of new media. So in the age of streaming, you have some people like Netflix's and Amazon who throw all the programs on at one time. So you have the entire 8, 10, 13 episode series that you could binge as you like, which plays into what you were talking about, that character development. Instead of me watching a half hour or an hour and then forgetting about it until the next week, that's an advertising model.
Right.
That's because you want the people to come back to see new ads. You don't have that on streaming. So I want to go watch Ted Lasso season 2. I'm not watching it until they're all posted, because I don't want to watch a half an hour a week. That's dumb. I want to watch Reservoir Boys on Hulu. Not going to do it until they're all posted. I don't understand why these new media companies insist on using old media formats to present the material. Throw them out in one batch. I'm going to come back because I can't do them all in one sitting. And if you're a good online media streaming service, you'll have new stuff for me to look at.
Are you suggesting that a lot of this is motivated by advertising? I'm shocked.
It is on television. It is not streaming because there's no ads. I mean, in Hulu, to a certain extent, there may be ads, but putting all your episodes, depending upon what tier you buy. But if putting them all on does not stop you from looking at those ads. On television, they want you to come back so you can look at new ads. But the streaming environment is completely different. And the benefit is, as opposed to broadcast, I can look at them all at one time. I can watch them whenever I want. Streaming services are television. There's no reason to do episodic broadcasts, releases.
Now, Liam, you follow this closely at Parks. This is a big, again, we're talking about it from a content and creative standpoint. What's your view of this in terms of, do you see the world morphing more dramatically toward this binge watching model where ultimately Stewart's going to get his wish, and when a show, debuts during a season, they just dump the entire season out there with 10, 15, 20 episodes that you can watch at your leisure, at your convenience, in a very sequential manner? Or do you think the old TV model that Stewart described, you still think that hangs around?
I do think that the old TV model will tend to hang around, because what a lot of these services are wanting is they want prolonged viewership, and they want prolonged conversation. They don't want, for a lot of these high-profile titles, everybody to watch it over one weekend and then immediately cancel the service or cancel their trial in the cases of some services that have trials. I think it's interesting that, last summer Disney Plus dropped its free trials right before they released Hamilton. So even if you only wanted to subscribe to Disney Plus to watch Hamilton, you'd still have to pay a brief subscription. But Disney Plus is kind of an interesting example, because their library of originals is definitely not as vast as Netflix or Amazon, but they were able to hike so highly in the OTT market because they have these Marvel projects and these Lucasfilm projects that, if you go on social media right after those drop, you're going to get spoiled. And so they want people to watch immediately, and they want to have them watch for 8 episodes or 12 episodes or however many weeks that they that those shows run, and then hopefully hook viewers into the other content within their library. Yeah, I think Apple TV Plus is another interesting example where they have this very relatively small library of fairly high value content. Their shows are very acclaimed, like Ted Lasso, and I want to watch Ted Lasso, but I don't want to pay for Apple TV Plus for 2 months. So that's one that I can wait on. But it will be interesting. I think you're going to see a mix of both.
So just finishing this question up with Rob. Rob, are you a big binge watcher yourself? And
no, honestly, it's the time to do that just escapes me. So I don't mind spaced out release strategies. I do agree. Liam brings up an important point that when you have free trials and you have rate plans that are built to allow churn, to invite it, there are no 1-year contracts. So you can binge watch and then dump whatever service it is and then sign up again. So this is one way they can sort of buy down a little of that risk that somebody gets a free trial, watches everything they want to watch, and then leaves.
I want to not push back. I think that the streaming services, this is not a zero sum. And all it takes is a little bit of corporate imagination to realize how you can work both ends of those. You can offer a free trial and you can still post all the episodes. But if you're on a free trial, you only get to watch 1 or 2.
Right.
This is not rocket science. There is an increasing number of people who binge. I am a binger. I want to see Foundation is coming up on Apple Plus. I don't want to wait 4 months for them to run all those episodes for me to start watching it. And even if you're not a binge, I can watch 2 at a time. I just think I don't think there's any reason for them not to work this.
Well, and from an advertising standpoint too, that they're not mutually exclusive. There's ways of doing the binge model with an advertising capability built into it. So you don't necessarily have to lose if you're a content creator or a studio or a streaming service. You don't have to lose that revenue, although it might irritate you. And by the way, Hulu Plus have a plan for people with advertising, without advertising. So there's lots of ways this is kind of morphing. Let's go to the next question. This is my favorite. Rob, when you sent me this question, I had visions of Charles Grodin and Robert De Niro and Midnight Run. And I had crazy visions in my head of you driving up and down the East Coast between Baltimore and Atlanta. But let's talk about this wildest run that you took.
Yeah, this is a very interesting bit of freelance work I did for PC Mag. Every year, that site does their fastest mobile networks. report, which involves a lot of drive testing of the wireless carrier's coverage and performance. And, I've been citing this work for years and years, in the guide to phone plans they do for Wirecutter. Their work is a big thing we consider in picking what plans to recommend. So I thought, you know what? I actually want to do some of this, get my hands dirty, do the drive testing myself. So my part of the project was picking up a rental car, doing half of the Baltimore testing. In each city, we'd pick out 12 spots, the idea being to distribute them around the city, a variety of income levels, have at least one in a downtown, one in a university area, one in a shopping area. Then drove from there, came back home to DC, spent a day driving around the district, drove from there to Raleigh, and they wanted us to not take the interstate. So I saw a lot of rural Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. I definitely came home testing positive for sweet tea. And from Raleigh, it was a day driving around there, Chapel Hill, Durham, then drove to Charlotte, a day driving around there, then drove to Atlanta, spent half the day driving around there, then handed the phones over to the next driver. And one thing I can tell you is drive testing is very meticulous. It's not just get a bunch of phones, turn them on, throw them in the passenger seat, hit the wheel, hit the road. It was 2 phones per carrier, one 5G and the other locked into 4G only mode. You'd have to stop, each stop 15 minutes, let the test software do its thing for, I think, 10 or 15 times in a row. And all that stuff gets uploaded. Somebody else has to crunch the numbers. So at least I'm not writing down upload and download speeds. And you're really babying this stuff, making sure the phones are charged, making sure they don't overheat. So I had the AC cranked to blow on these things all the time because they're running full tilt. They've got some sort of special SIMs in them that cannot be throttled. So these things are running up data usage totals in the hundreds of gigabytes. And so
in that Baltimore-Atlanta corridor, is the executive summary that 5G was a good experience, or was it not a good experience?
Depended on the carrier. So you can, as you can see now on PC Mag's site, for the first year, T-Mobile was judged the fastest mobile network because their mid-band 5G is that good. And I can confirm that. I know when I was, I could look down on the screens of these phones and see what sort of speed test results the test software was getting. And in the middle of DC on Howard University's campus, it was something like 600 megs up, 600 megs down, which you would think would be millimeter wave 5G. That was T-Mobile 5G. Verizon's 5G, the millimeter wave service they have, those frequencies cover such short distances. So it was very rarely, I can recall maybe 2 or 3 times, I'd look on the screen of the Verizon phone and see it say 5G UW, short for ultra wideband, their marketing term for it. AT&T has a little millimeter wave, and I only saw that once or twice. And so the net result is T-Mobile, because they have these mid-band frequencies that cover more distance and allow more speed than the low-band 5G everybody has, that gives them a competitive advantage right now. Assuming they have their mid-band frequencies lit up where you live, which is certainly the case in major cities. If you're driving in and out of Asheboro, North Carolina, not so much.
Liam, just real quick, and I'll just share a personal story, and I want to get Liam to comment on it. Is that since I've been doing a lot of work now in the Dallas area, the 5G coverage actually in the Dallas area is actually quite good. I specifically signed up for the hotspot service, which I would never do in San Jose because the 5G service is very poor. You really have to go up to San Francisco to get reasonably good 5G service. And it really is a game changer, in terms of having really, really good 5G coverage, at least in Dallas is a relatively big area. I'm out here in Addison, which is about 10 miles outside of downtown Dallas. But Liam, just from a 5G standpoint, is it something that, that you think that from an entertainment experience is going to change the game down the road? I mean, not right. I mean, we saw rollout issues, but purely from an entertainment standpoint, just give us a quick 30 seconds on where you think how 5G is going to have impact on 5G related entertainment.
I think that it's going to go back to that first chart that you pulled up when it really comes down to what's the preferred method of usage, because there's definitely a rise in mobile only content, but there's also we've seen some failures with that. Last year Quibi was marketed as this mobile only streaming service and completely bombed, and now Quibi content is on Roku, which is a TV, and now it's performing quite well on there, and Roku continues to expand on those. So it'll be interesting to see which how device preferences impacts 5G.
Interesting. Stewart.
Well, it's funny. I sort of did a test like Rob did, completely accidental and with one carrier. I took the Acela down to DC from New York, and I didn't even bother trying the Acela Wi-Fi because the Acela Wi-Fi, at least from my house, is awful. So I just stuck with 5G, and I watched TV through my Sling box through most of the way down to DC. And there was a couple of buffering, maybe a dozen or so buffers, and I lost the signal in tunnels for the most part. But otherwise, I was shocked that I had such a good TV viewing experience on the Acela, which is traveling at, I don't know, 100 miles an hour. So I was very surprised. I thought that the speed would defeat the signal, especially going through so many in and out areas, but T-Mobile managed to maintain a very surprisingly solid, certainly surprising to me, solid connection from New York to DC. The punchline is I get to my hotel, which is in a nice part of town, as Rob will tell you, and the hotel, I could only get LTE connection in my hotel room, which I thought was fairly odd. But it's funny talking about all this 5G, and all the email I'm getting on wireless services is all about 6G. And Netflix is talking about doing gaming, but they're going to have a latency problem with 5G, and I think they're going to need 6G in order to cut down on the latency issues that they are going to have, because gamers really require instant kind of stuff, and I don't think the 5G network is going to be satisfying for that.
Well, it's interesting stuff, and I can confirm your experience because in my hotel, the lovely Marriott that I'm staying at, I don't think I'll ever use the in-hotel Wi-Fi service. First of all, they want you to pay if you get a baseline service, and they want you to pay a daily charge to upgrade to what is still very, very slow internet speed. But 5G, I think, is where the world is going, and it sounds like everybody had a relatively positive experience, not just on the way to Baltimore to Atlanta, but more on this to come. Let's hit this one last topic because this is really intriguing to me. No, I don't know. I'm assuming that all three of you watched this, but Maher really did a job on Apple last Friday. It's an 8 or 9 minute diatribe, and the media is kind of glossing on the changes that are coming up in iOS 15 on the snooping, the phrase that he used of images on your phone for illegal child pornography material, and he was being a little bit unkind because it really not scanning the photos without getting into the whole technical discussion about that. It's about images that have been identified as illegal and objectionable, and there's a code associated with it, and we had that discussion a couple of weeks ago. But it really went after what I was surprised at, the whole what the smartphone concept has wrought on society. That it really essentially makes people bullies because of the anonymous factor. It makes them more willing to do things that they would never do if they had to be identified with doing a particular type of thing in terms of putting something online or being associated with it. So, Stewart, I know you want to bite your teeth into this topic, so to speak. So, what did you watch the clip? And
I did. I didn't watch the clip. I saw the show. I watch the show every week. I don't say I agree with him all the time. He can be a bit bombastic, and his vaccine stand is idiotic. But he was. I thought he was pretty dead on with the phones. I mean, I've always thought technology was like anything else on a bell curve, and it starts off really good and it gets to the peak, and then all of a sudden it becomes misused, and that's usually where the government steps in and starts doing regulation. This has been true throughout the history of technology for the last 125 years, and unfortunately the government hasn't gotten around to the equally bombastic tech companies, and they're beginning, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you give this tech companies like this so much power, they can either ignore the government or do whatever they want. On the Apple side, peeking into phones, they think they could do that. And on the Facebook side, just disregarding the government, whatever, to just put up false information about vaccines and not pay a penalty for that. So it works, I think, in all directions. And the only thing to do is haul Judge Green out of wherever he's, laid to rest, and break up one of these companies like he did AT&T in the early 80s. I think these companies have just gotten big enough to the point where I think the government just needs to do something, as they have throughout history.
So, Liam, before we end it with Rob, let me get your reaction. Did you get a chance to watch the clip? I
definitely don't always agree with Bill Maher, but he generally has a fairly interesting perspective, and it was interesting seeing how he delved into this topic of just social culture as it surrounds iPhone use and having that instant reaction, and you would say things on iPhones that you would never say in real life, and you also have the ability to, instead of disagree with somebody and talk to them frankly, you just walk away, or you just ghost them, as he calls it. And so I think I'm with Stewart. I think that these tech companies have so much power, and so there has to be a line.
Yeah, well, I want to get Rob's perspective before we end this, but my perspective on this is that, it's easy to blame everything on technology. Technology has done all these corrupting things to people, but I also believe there's a lot of personal responsibility that has to go into the equation. If individuals don't take personal responsibility for how they use these devices, I don't want to turn this into, it's not guns that kill people, it's people that kill people. Stuart's smiling at that, but the reality is, families, parents, individuals have to do a much better job of using this technology, because it's the most powerful electronic device on the planet. I'm not even sure Steve Jobs had any contemplation in his wildest dreams that this device would be so game-changing in terms of changing the fabric of the way we interact with people. In many ways, it's made society much more polarizing, which I think bothers a lot of people. But I think there's a level of personal responsibility that people have to face up to. So with that, let me just leave Rob with the closing comments on this.
So I did not see the clip, but as a professional Twitter user, I will not let that stop me from having an opinion. But was he really saying that this is somehow Apple's doing when every other phone has the same basic feature set, a camera, the ability to run apps, internet connection? Because if Windows Phone had triumphed, you would have people running the Twitter app on that and being jerks. And yeah, yes, the fact that you can be online at any point and express a value judgment can lead to bad outcomes. On the other hand, it can also let you document a lot of abuses that otherwise no one would have seen about.
Right.
There are norms we got to figure out. Certain people just don't understand. Every kid's got to be taught the difference between inside voice and outside voice. But the idea that this is somehow Apple's fault, come on, get out of here. That's ridiculous.
And Rob, I assume you'll be appearing at the Apple smartphone announcement.
They have not invited me to event in so long. I don't even know
absolution to the entire Apple Corporation. But anyway, listen, Rob, Liam, and Stewart, thank you for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons on the YouTube and Apple podcast platforms. And please visit Park Associates at www.parkassociates.com. And until next time, have a great week.